This is the Development Locker podcast, and this is your weekly investment in your development as you continue your transition through life and academy football. In season 3, we bring you even more episodes, more guests who you can connect with, and even more insight into individuals like you who have a similar experiences in pursuing a career in the professional game. Over the next 11 months and 48 episodes, we aim to cover the key topics you will face along your journey. From the challenges you will have to overcome, the ups, the downs, and many experiences along the way. We will be here every week to discuss the current issues in your lives, support you in your journey, and continue your development to being the best version of you in your interviews from the locker. One of the most prominent and current conversations in the sport, in particular academy football, mental health and well-being is everywhere you look. With a number of relevant documentaries on our screens discussing that very topic, we thought, why not welcome someone to the podcast who has applied practice of just this very topic. Thomas is working in one of the biggest clubs in the country, and as you will hear over the next 60 minutes, there's actioned some pretty innovative ideas. During our conversation, he also provides you, the listener, with some easy wins, simple tricks to positively contribute to your own mental health. I know you won't just be taking away one key message or one tool for that psychology tool bag, but many. But you're not here for this intro, so let's get you to the main event and our conversation with Thomas as we bring you your next interview from the locker. So Thomas, we like to get straight into the questions on the podcast, and we always start off with the why. In your opinion, why do you think modern day athletes, in particular those within football, have struggles with their mental health and their well-being?
I think, to be honest, it's a huge question, and I think there's always going to be. I don't think we'll be able to cover it fully in the answer that I'm about to give, but I think in football and in sport in general, but we'll focus in specifically on football with this particular point. There's a huge amount of uncertainty, and that uncertainty can come within any form of like big decision that's made in football. So, for example, if we run through a few, it could be a long-term injury, it could be deselection, it could be a change of clubs, it could be a change of countries for some athletes. And I think that brings a real large amount of uncertainty, which can be difficult to deal with as an athlete if you are if you don't have the right support around you, in terms of that could be family, that could be friends, that could be supportive in the club as well. So I think uncertainty is a big part. I think the environment that you're part of could also play some fact into that as well. I think it's dependent on the environment that you're in terms of how comfortable you feel, how you're able to really build relationships with those around you, and how you're able to share meaning with those players and staff and significant others around you within that environment. That could go some way to supporting or potentially decreasing the mental health of that specific athlete. So I think, as I mentioned, that the question's huge, but I think those are a couple of elements that spring to mind sort of straight away when you do ask that question.
You touched upon there, and the key word I took from that response a couple of times was uncertainty. Is it even possible to try and support and be proactive in predicting, foreseeing those uncertainties in football? Or is it almost like even the best laid plans, you'll need to always react to some aspects of mental health and well-being?
Yeah, I think there will always be a reactive element, and I don't necessarily think you can predict. But some of the things that I potentially like to do with athletes is potentially prepare a little bit better. So if we go back to the part about where you talk about potentially long-term injury or deselection or a change of club or a change of country, that will have some bearing on the identity of that individual that I may be working with. So actually, once that working partnership begins, are you able to support that athlete to ensure that they have a robust and rounded identity, that if that football element was to be taken away for whatever reason, for example, injury, are they able to have a much more rounded personality and sense of meaning that allows them to do something else whilst transitioning through that injury phase? So I think that there is that complete unpredictability element of it, but there's also the little things that you could maybe prepare for or potentially just put things in place to support. I don't think you're ever going to combat that uncertainty element, but I think you might be able to put small things in place that could help support along the journey. I think that's probably the fairest way to put it, I would say.
I think journey is another key word, because I think that uncertainty in the journey, whether this is from a psychological point of view or a holistic point of view, surely that journey is always going to be different. There's always going to be uncertainty. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, and you cannot prepare any athlete, never mind every athlete, to be able to deal with some of those peaks and troughs, highs and lows through their journey, and those uncertainties that they get. And I suppose those uncertainties, they actually make the journey, don't they?
Yeah, 100%. I would completely agree with that. Like football, and even if you looked at a 90-minute game of football, that's filled with uncertainties. So if you were to take that as the example at the top, imagine how many uncertainties are going to be there through a 10 to 15-year journey to ultimately achieve professional football status. I think it's huge, and I think those uncertainties and those growth points where you're able to almost assess how it's gone and assess why it may have gone that way, and the things you could do to support with that, making sure you touch base with the right individuals that are going to help support with that. I think that's a massive part of it. So as you said, you're not going to combat uncertainty, but if you can access the right support around you to be able to transition through that uncertainty and potentially learn and grow from it, I think that's going to be a massive benefit to you.
Mental health, well-being, it's very prominent, isn't it? Not just in football, in a lot of sport. You see quite on a weekly, if not daily basis, athletes, whether it's, from tennis, from rugby union, recently on Sky Sports News, of very elite athletes taking time away to focus on their mental health and well-being. And the question I'm trying to ask, is it as bad as we think it is, or is it just more prominent because of social media platforms, and the avenues for that message to get out, and these pieces of news to get out? Whereas from my age, generationally, you'd have to wait for the newspaper, the nightly news. Is it because we have all these social media and platforms that it becomes more, the awareness is increased, or is it as bad as we think it is in sport at the moment?
I feel like that could be potentially be a bit of both. I think the awareness has most certainly increased in terms of the media's awareness of athletes suffering with their mental health, just like there is a huge awareness and push on media in general with the whole population that potentially suffer with their mental health. I feel like that's a really important part that awareness has changed. I think mental health in sport has been a taboo topic, especially in football, for a sustained period of time. It wasn't a done thing to speak to a psychologist or to speak to a clinical psychologist about any of the struggles that you may be having. That is beginning to change in terms of, even if you look at the EPPP program, if for Category 1 academies, they must have a performance psychologist in the building in order to meet criteria, which I think is a really important part of that. So the awareness is changing. The acceptability is somewhat changing, I would say. It's not changing wholeheartedly. There's a lot more to do. I would say there's a lot more to do. But the more and more people that are able to speak about their struggles and the support that they've gained and how it's allowed them to feel and how it's allowed them to make meaningful change, I think that's only going to benefit those, especially those younger individuals that will have that. They'll have that role model, they'll have that information available to them from such a young age that it's okay to speak about these things. And if you are a footballer, if you are a rugby player, if you are a cricket player, you don't have to hide these things because of your sporting abilities. Your sporting abilities has no form of impact on your mental health continuum, how you may feel dependent on each day. And I think that message that gets put out there is really important. And I think the younger players that are coming through now will have that message probably a lot more than players used to a good few years ago. And I think that's really important.
And how difficult is it then, as someone who's working within football, to try and address that taboo or deal with athletes, players in this respect, who potentially don't want that stigma associated with that taboo? Is that a very difficult thing, or do you kind of rise to that challenge and try to address that balance and try to achieve some form of kind of equilibrium or parity with getting rid of that taboo and that stigma and the negative connotations with mental health and well-being? How difficult is it from a practitioner in the sport to be able to try to turn what is deemed a negative into what is a completely natural emotion?
Yeah, 100%. It's a huge part of the role, and I think that, in my opinion, and other performance psychologists may have a difference of opinion to this, but it's about the relationships that you create with the athletes and staff that you're working with. I think if you're able to create real solid working relationships where they feel comfortable to share information, and that information could be how their day went at college, how their driving lessons have gone the past few weeks. It could be conversations about their results that are coming up from the different qualifications that they may have taken. It could be about even speaking to them about a move that they want to make to a different club or to a different environment. I think building those relationships and having those quote unquote normal conversations allows them to see that actually, as an individual, you care about what they have to say. You don't necessarily talk to them about their performance related aspects all the time, which I think is really important, because obviously within a performance environment, that's what you speak about the majority of the time. I do appreciate that's the natural thing to do, but I think removing that performance element and speaking to the individual as an individual and rather than a football player, that goes a long way to being able to then have a conversation that may be really difficult for that individual when they choose to have it. So I think from a personal element, it's building the relationship and allowing people to talk when they want to about things that are completely unrelated to performance. That then gives you that opportunity to then have that conversation, which could be really difficult at a chosen time, potentially down the line, because of the relationship that you've been built. I think also the environment comes into that. So, for example, if you're speaking with other staff, if staff members aren't able to show that actually we might have had a really bad day before these players have turned up to train today, so actually, are we going to brief them on that, or are we going to stand in a mood and coach them in a mood for the next hour and a half? And they're going to see that we're in a strop, but we won't say why. They're going to feel it from us as well, and that's going to affect their session. So actually, there's the open element as well of it's absolutely fine for the staff as well to tell the players about their emotions or why they may be feeling a certain way on that day, and creating that open sharing and honest environment, which is difficult to do and ultimately potentially doesn't happen all the time. I do appreciate that. But if you're able to go some way to try and combat that, that will allow the individuals and the players that are around you to almost see that example and be able to, and think that they're able to share too. So I think it's the relationship element and creating that relationship, and then the structure of the environment and how you share emotions and feelings within that environment to allow players to see that and then deal with what they may be dealing with in the most open and honest way possible.
And you mentioned conversations there, and I'll ask you a question relating to that in a minute. But firstly, is the other bits of just other than the conversations that clubs, academies, similar organisations can do to build a mentally healthy culture within their organisation, whether that be from a staff or a player perspective? Is there things that you do or you would advocate other clubs who are listening to this would do to create that mentally healthy culture?
I think there is a wide range of options, and ultimately, depending on the practitioners that work in each club, it will be done slightly differently. So, for example, within the club that I'm at currently, we utilise the example of, and this can be searched on YouTube. So we utilise the example of Arsenal Island, which was a magnetic map that was stuck up on the wall, and it was like a picture that was depicted a jungle. And within this jungle and within these different islands, there was loads of different emotions and feelings that related to a specific place. I believe it was done by Dr. Kate Green. Please don't quote me on that if it's wrong, but I think that's where it's from. But if you type in Arsenal Ireland to YouTube, you'll see it. It's about a 5-minute clip. So about 3 years ago, I come across that and thought it would be really beneficial to do. And obviously, I can't just steal the idea and take the Arsenal Ireland and bring it into the club that I'm at currently, because that isn't relevant for our individuals. So what we did is we worked with an artist and we created a map of the city that we're based in. And within that city, we picked out a variety of different landmarks, and we associated an emotion or a feeling to each of those landmarks. And every day, so players from under 9s all the way up to the under 21s, every session they attend, they fill in how they're feeling that particular day.
Wow.
There's a variety of positive and more so negative emotions as well. It was very important that the players didn't feel like they were going to be interrogated if they put a negative emotion, for example. So I'm looking at next to me now, for example, one of the emotions is lonely. If a player puts that on one day, they're not going to be pulled out of the session, has to have a conversation about why they're feeling lonely at that exact moment, because that defeats the point of the openness and the honesty of the environment. If they were to put that 4 or 5 days in a row, then potentially it's time for a chat. And I think they know that as well from the information that's been explained to them. But it also goes back to when I mentioned about the staff also being open and aware. So when we first filtered this project into the environment, we were very aware that the players hadn't had this before. They wasn't used to it. It was something new to them. So actually, they were given a counter with their squad number on, and they would move that counter around a magnetic board every session. We also give the staff a counter, and we asked them to put it on honestly how they were feeling and see if the players asked them. And it took 2, 3, 4 weeks to get it going. And we then asked the staff to really honestly put it on how they're feeling. And one staff put it on. We have a section that's called Lost Your Head. And one staff member put it on there due to them literally just being stuck in loads of traffic on the way to a session. That was the reason they put it on there. And a couple of the players asked why. And that was the whole point of why we integrated this wellbeing map into our environment, so that players and staff felt comfortable to ask each other, are you okay? Is there any reason why you're feeling like that? Do you want to tell us? If you don't, no problem, but we're here for you if you do. And that isn't necessarily, as a performance psychologist, that wasn't just my job to go around and ask the players that. That information was placed on the pitch so their fellow players could see it, so their peers could see it, their coaching staff could see it. And I think that went some way to building a culture where players and staff feel like they were able to talk about how they were feeling, which I think ties into the mental health question that you just asked, I hope.
No, yeah, more. I mean, it's great, like you said, as somebody who does pinch a fair number of ideas from sports and other academies and football clubs, it's always great to hear you doing that and then redesigning your own, and the fact that you've utilised landmarks and built upon that idea, the Arsenal Island, it is very, it's a very visual, very impactful tool. Probably most people, staff point of view, will be aware of. Some of our listeners, players, might not be, but it's a very good visual representation to represent their emotional state, and that's it's brilliant. I think things like that, you guys in psychology just have this ability to simplify the complicated. And the Arsenal Island, or from your club that you're working at, the landmarks from within your city, it's just a great, almost easy win, and just an engaging kind of tool to use. So that's great. And kind of going back to the question I was going to have around conversations from a staff perspective, working in an academy, how do you start those conversations? How do you foster them, build upon them, without the obvious of, are you okay? Is the ways that staff who are listening to this episode can reword that to have a greater impact, to elicit certain responses, or to create that openness that you talked about?
I think, again, like, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it goes back to that relationship that you build with the playing group. And I also completely appreciate from a coach's point of view, if you have a squad of 20 players, it's really difficult to have a real personal relationship with each of those 20 players. But you'd like to think throughout the season or throughout a number of weeks and months, those players would become very second nature to those coaches. So I think because of the amount of time you would spend with them, you'd like to think, and that's a big word, you would like to think that it would become quite apparent to the coaches if something was up, or something was slightly different, or something could change in that individual. But again, there's also a lot of different media outlets there that have described or have shown that some people's mental health, no one sees it, and they keep it to themselves, and you won't see a change in the individual. And in fact, you might see a change in the opposite manner, so they can completely hide how they're feeling altogether. So I think it is just the ability to check in. I don't think it has to be an intrusive check-in in terms of, well, you tell me how you're feeling right now. In terms of, we like to step away from the question, are you okay? But it's such a broad and it's such an open question. You don't lead anyone down a path with what you're asking them. And actually, I really enjoyed the Roman Kemp documentary about when he lost his friend to suicide, and they interviewed a couple of lads, and they just asked, are you okay, twice. So they asked it the first time, and then they asked it again, and it seems really trivial, and it is when you really boil it down, but it's also really important. Like, you, dependent on the response you get the first time from the are you okay question, it may lead you to ask another question about, okay, but what's been going on in school, or how's your mum and dad, or how's your brother or your sister been getting on? And then that without asking someone specifically, how is your mental health, you're able to sort of float around the subject whilst also getting a depiction to how their life's going currently, and any of the information that you get from that can potentially benefit the conversations you have moving forward. So I think that are you okay question can potentially be intrusive, but it's also a very open question, which allows the individual to choose how they'd like to respond. And then from that response, we could probably frame our question slightly better in terms of the area that we may want to ask them about, because we might have noticed that there's something different about them recently. I think I might describe that well enough. I'm not sure.
No, you have. And it's not to say that that's a hack, because it's not. It's a very deep and meaningful thing, and such an easy thing to say. Like you said, just repeating that question of are you okay allows, it almost increases the chance of a response. So, but speaking of kind of hacks, easy wins, is there a hack to establish a positive mental health in a 5-day kind of process thing? So sometimes you see, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, there's a lot of influencers out there, and they're all promising, oh, you can achieve increased mental health within 5 days. Is this a mixed or even a wrong message to be sending out, that it can be done in that shorter time? Or do you see it as a good thing that people are actually wanting to get that out via a platform and contribute to the scope of addressing mental health and well-being, not just in sport, but as a wider community?
Yeah, I think that's like a bit of a double-pronged question, in terms of actually the fact that information's out there for individuals, and is able to, and the topic of mental health is being discussed on these social media platforms that young people can access, is good. But in terms of the information that they may have available to them, or the things that are potentially being promised, because I think I'm not massively into social media, but some of the elements that I do have, there's a lot of promises being made, and I think that's really difficult, because there aren't any promises within mental health and well-being. There aren't any promises you can make. There are things that you can do to support your mental health. So, for example, it could be for an individual that has been feeling particularly low over the past few days or the past few weeks or months, can you connect with individuals that have a positive effect on you? So that could be going out with your friends to the cinema, or it could be going to Power League to play a little bit of five-a-side with your friends. Dependent on your age, that could be going to the pub with your friends and having a chat. That could be going to pick up some food and have a conversation around there. Doing something to support your own mental health in that way and connecting with other people can be really beneficial. These videos that speak about 5 tricks or 5 hacks, I'm not a massive fan of those words. It all comes down to personal opinion ultimately, but I'm not a massive fan of those words myself, because I don't feel like there's a trick or there's a hack. They say basic, but sometimes those basic things can be really difficult for individuals to do, where they're able to surround themselves with things that potentially they know will make them feel better. But those particular things may be really hard to start, depending on how you're feeling. and seeing a little 5-second, 10-second video about these 5 guarantees might not be the best thing for some individuals. But I also, that's why I said it's a double-pronged question, because I also appreciate that it is beneficial for young people to see people talking about mental health on social media, so it's an open topic.
Yeah.
Those particular videos may encourage one person to seek support, but it's more the guarantees and the promises that they're making that doesn't particularly sit well with me or my morals and how I'd like to deliver something.
Yeah, I'd have to totally agree with you on that one. I think it's mixed emotions where you just think great for you to try to, because we all know that, you know, the Generation Z that, you know, our players come from, live within, almost want that quick fix, that easy win, that hack, that tip, that trick in a short 5-second video on TikTok or Instagram, whereas we know it's not that easy. But could it be used as an avenue just to spark a light bulb moment to make them question or think about it? Then yeah, potentially that could be a good thing. But like you said, giving promises or false promises out can be massively detrimental. And speaking of some of the negative bits, and we'll move on to more positive bits in a minute, but mental health and well-being, I'm guilty of it because that's the title of this episode. They're used quite a lot interchangeably, not just within football, within life, within society. Is this incorrect? Are there overlaps between the two, or should the two things be completely separate from a psychology perspective?
I think that's a massive question. I think that's a question that has been debated a lot as well as between performance psychology, between a number of different practitioners working in various both sporting and non-sporting environments. Are those things intertwined? My own opinion is yes. I think there is they are intertwined. I think there's a much deeper conversation around it, but I think if you're supporting or aiming to support someone's mental health, whether that be with the environment you create, the conversations that you have, the relationships that you build, or the support you provide, if you're able to support someone's mental health, then that should have an upturn in their well-being. I do appreciate that might not always be the case for every single individual, and that's why it's a really intertwined question in terms of the outcomes that you can have, specifically due to the individuality of each person that you work with may view it, or each client that you have may view it slightly differently, or it may have a different effect on that specific individual. But overall, I would say they are intertwined, and it's more of a continuum, and you might shuffle someone along the continuum and be able to support them with both of those aspects in different ways, or it might be a real joint and aligned approach where if you're supporting someone's well-being, that specifically has a good effect on their mental health, whereas for others that might not be the case. So I think it's a debatable question. I feel like I can only give my opinion, but I think hopefully I've explained why I have reasoning behind my opinion and why I may choose to view something like that.
Yeah, and the game's full of opinions, isn't it? I suppose psychology is no exception to that, and certainly mental health and well-being, there's not another exception for that either. And it's about what you said about having the conversation, having the debates, bringing different opinions to the table. So hope that's what we're doing through this episode, and people can take what they feel they need from this episode, and and embed it in their lives to build upon it, and building upon the question that I've just asked there, and turning our focus onto more positive things, specifically for well-being. Now, without contradicting myself in an easy win hack, for our listeners, predominantly academy players within men's football, is there anything, so we all know about daily habits, about getting to good daily habits. Is there something that our listeners can be doing starting tomorrow that can positively impact on everyone or most people's well-being as a person, not just as a player?
Yeah, I think I've always tried to step away from the term daily habits. I don't particularly have a reason as to why as well. It's just a word or a phrase that I've stepped away from, and
Okay.
whereas I more so look at it as just small changes, and what small changes are individuals making to better support their well-being or potentially their happiness on a given day, week, month, year. And I think those small changes will eventually become habits, exactly like you've just explained. But those small changes could be actually benefiting their performance as well as their well-being. So, for example, little things like making sure that 8 hours sleep in terms of recovery. It could be stepping away from your phone an hour and a half before, which I don't do. So it's very hypocritical on here, but stepping away from your phone an hour to 90 minutes before you actually go to sleep to improve your sleep quality and allow you to better get a chance of getting that 8 hours. It's all those small changes that I would say an individual consciously makes to better support their well-being. It might not be a conscious decision in terms of I'm doing this to support my well-being. It may be a conscious decision of I'm doing this because I just think it makes me feel better. It doesn't necessarily have to be formalized for each individual. They could just make these small changes because they really enjoy them. So, for example, I'm trying to do the 30 seconds in the cold shower every morning, which through the summer and over this past hot period is completely fine. But when I wake up on December the 3rd, there's no guarantees that I'm going to do that cold shower for 30 seconds then, but I've enjoyed it. So it's that small change that I'll keep going for as long as I can because it's made me feel better in the morning. So it's
so go on, sorry to interrupt. Tell us about the science or the psychology behind that, because I've seen that quite a few times. I'm thinking, really? And like you, I'm like, yeah, obviously before the heat wave and before the elevated temperatures we've all had up and down the country, I'm thinking there's no way I'm spending 10 seconds, never mind 30 in a cold shower. So tell us some of the thinking behind that and some of the benefits you feel yourself individually you've had or experienced off the back of it so far.
I'll be honest with you. I wish I could tell you the science and the logistics behind it, but I'd be absolutely lying to you if I sat now and said that I knew it all. I literally seen the Wim Hof program on ITV.
Yes.
I think Patrick Severa is on it, and I must have watched 30 minutes of across the whole series. I didn't really pay attention to it, but bits that I did see was talking about the cold showers in the morning, and I literally just thought I'd try it. And I spoke to a few friends, and they tried it. And they just mentioned how it made them feel a little bit fresher in the morning. It made them feel a little bit more awake if they were waking up potentially tired.
So how is that physically? Sorry to delve into very personally. How is that? You literally just having a 30-second blast of cold water and you're out. Do you have a 30-second blast to wake you up and then you turn the temperature up so you can actually have your shower to set you up for the day or whatever part of the day you're having your shower? Is it a 30-second in and out done, or is it a 30-second intro to what your actual shower routine is?
So I'm the opposite way around. I would have my standard shower and then finish with 30 seconds of cold water.
Very
just
brave.
So that's the last point. That's basically the start of my day. At that point, 30 seconds is done. I'm able to then go and get on with my day. So in terms of packing my bag ready to leave, it might be making a lunch, it might be going to the gym before I go to work. It could be all those things. But I feel like once that warm water ends and the cold water starts, the day is about to begin and you feel quite fresh for that. But as I said, I don't have a clue about the science behind it. Just something that I've enjoyed doing over the past few months.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very receptive, open-minded, and I love to try a fad, whether it's nutrition, psychology, well-being, mental health. But I don't think I'll be trying that one because, I don't think I could. Yeah, I think I'll wimp out of that one. But yeah, I prefer a not too hot a shower, but yeah, a warm shower, even in summer. So yeah, personal preference.
Yeah.
In terms of continuing the theme of well-being, is there a process of we can check in on our own well-being? So you mentioned about the Arsenal Island. You've mentioned about your landmark that you use at your club. Is there something that you or I or any listener, whether they're a player, a parent, a member of staff within football, that they can do to check in on their own well-being? Is that utilising an app? Is there a pen and paper kind of process toolkit to use to check in on our own mental health? Is there something that you can give our listeners in that respect?
I feel like, again, this because the topic of mental health and well-being is so broad, it's going to be so different for every individual that may want to do this. So for example, I'm a visual person. I like having something written down in front of me, which I can see it. I'm a big fan. When I was in university, I would never take a laptop. I always had written notes. So I know that my ability to check in is writing something down, and that's not a deep and meaningful diary at the end of every day, which to some people may be absolutely brilliant, but that for me isn't what I'm after. It's just a few words of how I'm feeling. So I actually like to do this before our team plays a game. So I'm predominantly based with our under 21 group, and how before they play a game, I just like to note down how I'm feeling. And that's just a thing that I've done before every game that we played. I don't necessarily have a reason as to why, but I think it's just my time to have that personal check-in in terms of how I'm feeling on that day. Again, that's more performance related. I will admit that, but that's the way I've liked to do it. And I think I've mentioned it before, but it's so individualized to each and every person. But finding how you like to do something, how you like to learn something, or how you like to think in a certain way, those elements of how you then check in with yourself are going to be down to you. But it doesn't have to be deep, formal, meaningful. It could be a few words. It could be a quick conversation with someone. It could be typing a few things out on an app. There's all those different things available, but it doesn't particularly matter, in my opinion, which one you do, as long as you find something that's relevant to you and you're able to specifically think about how you may be feeling in a variety of different scenarios and situations, I would say.
Okay, no, I love the honesty, and like I said, it is all down to the individual. Even the best will of the world, you can't cater for everybody, and anybody will find a fault of going, nah, that doesn't really work for me. So I appreciate your honesty and your feedback in that, because yeah, that will really kind of transcend with our listeners. I'm sure it will. In terms of practice, so getting away from daily habits or small changes, is this something within the environments within football where you see, sorry to go slightly negative again, but poor or subconscious poor practice unknowingly that you see within football that you feel really needs to be corrected in terms of well-being? Is I mean, obviously you don't have to give names, clubs and things of that nature, but is this something where you see a reoccurring theme within football? You think we really need to focus on this within well-being, because that's now becoming a current problem, or you see a lot of poor practice within the sport?
I think the way you described it as unknowing is probably a really relevant way to start. So football traditionally, and watching football sessions and watching football games is brutal. Some of the feedback you receive is really tough. Some of the physical demands are unbelievably tough. The mental demands that come along with that can be incredibly difficult to withstand as well. So what myself and the staff at this club have looked at doing is making sure the environment is facilitative. So we took that from some research from Dr. Mustafa Sarkar. I believe he's at Nottingham Trent University at the moment, which is talking about building resilience in sporting teams and different organisations. And if you were to picture a standard graph, there is then that graph. So with the line going upwards and the line going across, within that graph, it's then split into 4 sections. And there is the names of different sections, and the one that we aim to fit into is the one on the top right, which is a facilitative environment, which is actually being really, really highly challenged, but providing really high levels of support to go alongside that. So that has been shown to help develop the resilience of individuals within a team sport, or within a sporting environment, should I say. And get into that facilitative environment is really important. So the players understand why we're doing it, the staff understand why we might be doing it, and actually the parents who bring their children to come and play football understand that we're aiming to get into this part of it. So, for example, if I went back the other way, if you provide extremely high challenge and then no form of support, that becomes an unrelenting environment, and that means that players won't be able to cope with that due to the unbelievably high demands that are being placed on them over a significant period of time, which then means that it might not necessarily mean for every individual that their mental health suffers, but that may mean for certain individuals that may be the case because they may be unable to cope with that unrelenting environment. So it's that high challenge, high support to really get into that facilitative environment and allow players to experience loads of different challenges in loads of different ways, and we can support them in loads of different ways with that. That doesn't mean that they have to have the handheld every second of the way, because I think that's really important to state as well. So it could be that we've talked about in this environment the real importance of a brief and a debrief, or one or the other. So you might set up a specific session as a coach. You might ask the players to do a task that you know is really difficult for them. It's brand new to them. The particular topic that you're delivering is brand new, and they're really going to struggle to do it. So you might brief them really well beforehand on the reasons why, allow them to ask questions, allow them to discover, and then you might get them to go and do it. And if they don't do it very well, you might get them in and say, not a problem, we'll go again next week and we'll see what happens in that change. Or you might set them up with a really difficult task and give them no form of brief. You might let them struggle. You might let them try to work out themselves, but then you may give them a really thorough debrief as to why you've just done that and the reasons for why it will be beneficial for their development, and allow them to discover. Once that debrief has happened, you might even put them back into the session and see if there's any changes. So I think there's the real. That's why I think it said it's done unknowingly, because an unrelenting environment is probably what traditionally associated with football, whereas we're trying to shuffle over to a facilitative environment where that high support bit really attaches onto the high challenge element that I imagine is there in almost every academy across the country.
I totally agree with you, Thomas. In that respect, I've yet to see 7 years in the academy system. It's not a long time in comparison to what some people have been in the academy system and within football, but I've yet to see anybody who is knowingly contributing or negatively impacting somebody's mental health and well-being, or just that as a person, never mind as a player. So I think that is a key thing, and a key thing to highlight as well. It is that unknowingly, and sometimes it can be a lack of knowledge, a lack of education, whatever it may be. But it's important to highlight that factor and appreciate response in that. Speaking of responses, final question, and you've done exceptionally well so far, but in some ways I get it's individual, but we need you to get off that fence now and give a little bit more specific information on the final one. Is there one lasting piece of advice or message that you would like to give our listeners to finish off your episode?
Oh, that is a difficult one. in terms of a specific topic?
Well, mental health and well-being, if you could, but if it's anything broader from psychology, if it's life advice, this episode is yours. The floor is yours. So, one lasting piece of advice for our listeners where they can kind of really take that away with them.
I was trying to stay on the fence there. That's why I was going to ask in what specific topic. But I think for me, and what's been really beneficial for me as a practitioner within the environment, has been, in terms of from a player's point of view, it's knowing that someone wants to know. So, for example, I've always tried to give across the impression that actually demonstrate that I actually want to know how that individual may be feeling. So it's real trivial, but I would make sometimes a beeline to ask people about their dog's name and then keep that information so that I know it, so they understand that I care. I think actually knowing that information and showing those players that you really care allows them to talk to you. So I think actually your coaches aren't just your coaches, your S&C staff aren't just your S&C staff. They're there because they really care about you. So if you have something to say, whether that be about your A-level or GCSE results, whether that may be about your family, your relationships, someone's there, and actually there'll be someone within that environment who's around you that wants to know. And it's just having that courage to ask that question or to access that particular conversation to really find out that that individual wants to know, especially when you're working in a team sport or you're part of a team that has 20 other players. It can be difficult to understand or even contemplate that someone wants to know. But in my experience, from working with a number of different staff and a number of different players, they do want to know. So tell them and see what response you get, and hopefully you can go from there. I think that's probably. Hopefully, I've got off the fence a little bit for that one.
No, you have, and I appreciate some of the questions we fire at you. There's no easy wins. There's no right or wrong way to answer them, and it's it's about having that conversation like we're doing now. So I apologize for kind of making you come off that fence. And it's, you know, it's the professionalism of yourself and other psychologists within football who do some great work, like I said before, simplifying the complicated. And it's not always easy, is it, just to go, you do it this way, this is what you need to do. So I appreciate that. And it must be difficult to be on the other side of the microphone, to have these questions fired at you, give something back, but without kind of giving misinformation or things that are not necessarily going to work for different individuals. So I appreciate the hard job you have, but I think you finished off well of giving something a little bit more specific and getting off that fence, as we both said. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time, you know, on behalf of myself and the listeners. It's been really great to connect with you and have a conversation around mental health and well-being. So thank you.
No, perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
It still amazes me now how practicing psychologists can simplify the difficult and complicated. How they almost have a tool for everything, and Thomas was no exception to this rule. The use of landmarks from the city to build upon the island, originally designed by Arsenal, is a great visual representation for players and staff to demonstrate their thoughts, feelings and emotions on a daily basis. A demonstration how ideas can translate from club to club and be used to benefit players than it was originally designed to. Daily habits, we've all heard of them, tried them and probably failed to embed them in our lives. But what Thomas advocates is small changes. Yet another psychological hack, reframing it into something simpler, more achievable and more impactful too. Until next time, we now move our focus to your financial future as we focus on yet more key topics within the financial world of an academy player or young professional. But before that, we bring you our first story from an academy graduate in the edition of The Journey of Season 3. For more details, be sure to keep an eye out on our social media streams, and we look forward to bringing you next week's interview from the locker. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and we hope you have taken many key messages away with you. But the next part is down to you now, by putting these into action. If you'd like today's episode, feel free to tell us on our various social media platforms, where you can find us at thelocker_UK. For guest recommendations, future topics to be discussed, or you simply want to reach out, you can do so by emailing us on thedevelopmentlocker@gmail.co.uk. Remember to share this episode and our platform with your teammates, friends in football, or anyone you feel would benefit from it. So, what are you waiting for? But you're not done yet, as we look forward to seeing you next week when we bring you another interview from the locker.